We want to make sure that you understood the study guide question about the two things that wiped out Native Americans. So let's take a moment and just review the Native American experience based on what we've covered so far in this unit. When Columbus arrived in the Americas in 1492, and then later with Europeans like the French and the British, this is the general map of the regions, including the tribes and their common characteristics. Now, we've seen the woodlands, especially with the French and the British, the southeast, a little bit of the British, but mostly the Spanish. And we're seeing all of these groups being pushed further and further east, and from the east to the west into the plains. Now, the thing that's going to kill Native Americans more than anyone else is disease. This image right here gives you a basic idea when Columbus and later Cortez and Coronado arrive in what would become Mexico. It was devastating. I mean, the population drop is really terrifying. Almost 22 million natives lived in what would become Mexico and the surrounding areas. And smallpox is going to wipe out most of them. You're going to see a drop from almost 22 million to under 2 million. That gives you an idea just how devastating the disease was. So why didn't it kill whites the way it killed natives? Well, Europeans living in close packed cities tended to develop immunities to disease. A lot of the people that didn't have the immunities died. Those that were able to survive that were able to spread and pass on their immunity on to future generations. Well, natives tended not to live in large groups. They didn't have those large cities, and for the most part, they couldn't develop those immunities to diseases. As a result, 90% of a tribe might die of smallpox, measles, even the flu. So this was a devastating, debilitating situation for natives to deal with. The other thing that's really going to hurt them is the fact that the government is pushing them west, off of their lands in the east, forcing them to go west. Treaties with some of these tribes would force natives onto what we call reservations. This is land that was set aside for natives to use and to live on. This was not an ideal situation. And even if the treaties were signed, often the U.S. government or even settlers would come in and they'd just violate the treaties. They'd force the natives or attack the natives to get them off the land. We tend to think, especially in the middle of the country, of buffalo as providing a lot for Native Americans. In many ways, it was the Walmart for Native Americans. It could provide everything from food to shelter to tools. Well, a lot of the Great Plains tribes were often nomadic hunter-gatherers. They followed herds of buffalo. That's going to be impossible with reservations. Also, reservations provided very little opportunity for natives that were used to farming to have good land, to have access to water, to actually produce the crops in order to survive. And you can see the reservations if you know anything about these lands. The reservations here tended to be on the worst lands. In Nevada, for example, Pyramid Lake, just north of that, not good land for farming. As we talked about the movement of natives off of their homelands and onto reservations, the Indian Removal Act would force groups like the Cherokee, who would even sue, Jackson would ignore it. 4,000 would die out of the 17,000 because of the movement to reservations. So I just want to recap very quickly. Natives would die because of disease, or that movement onto reservation that produced starvation and exposure. So it's disease and the movement onto reservation that's going to wipe out most natives. And many even would have to try to become American, which really means white. So there's a racial element there. Even then, they weren't treated equally. So please, remember, it's disease and the reservation movement that's going to wipe out most of the natives. If you have any questions, ask myself or ask Miss Mansfield.